The Bledisloe Cup gone for another year, but can the Wallabies break their drought across the ditch? We'll find out in the next couple of days. But until then, and before then, a really special guest coming up on the podcast today, the Rugby Australia chairman, one of the last people to win across the ditch, having beaten the All Blacks in 2000 in a very memorable match in Wellington. That is Dan Herbert. And joining me, as always, Matt Tamua. Well, Matt, there was a lot to pick apart that test on the weekend in Sydney. 68,000 there. It actually felt to me like it was closer to 75. There's no way in the world that there was 12,000 empty seats on that sparkling, sunny spring day at the Olympic Stadium. But another day where your hopes kind of turned to dust a little bit, and the dust kind of happened right from the outset, and somehow they almost rose from the ashes before the game was already done.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, I was nervous after, 12 minutes or something that we were a few tries down. I just thought, oh, you're kidding. This is going to be awful. And, no, but fair play, fair bit of, obviously something set half time and to wrestle back some momentum, to get a few tries, to stop them from scoring in as well. And it's fair play, credit where it's due. And to be in a chance to actually win that game with a minute to go is pretty remarkable considering the beginning.
Tell me, whilst we're talking about the end of the game with a minute to go, the contact on Hunter Paisami, is it high? Is it a penalty? Because I know that Artie Sevilla does nothing wrong when he grabs him slightly from behind, but then TJ Perinara, initially the contact is fine, but it very much goes up towards the neck. And I'm surprised that the TMO looked at it, cleared it, because I would have thought that, hey, yes, it's a free kick and a scrum to the All Blacks, but I thought that the Wallabies could have got a penalty there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I dare say the TMO very much seems it's the initial contact, isn't it? I haven't really thought of it that way. Once it becomes a more, obviously teams, particularly when the attacking player is trying to get his knee to the ground, so he's trying to dip, and then it becomes quite vulnerable to get caught high. So no, I never really thought of that, to be honest. My initial feelings from it was, it was fair. I thought Hunter's footwork on the first two guys was amazing, and then unfortunately, he got held up by two very experienced campaigners who came up with a huge play with the game on the line. So there was actually another hit, I think, in the Japanese Fiji game that was very similar, kind of like a front on, upright on the ball, and that got a yellow card. So it is really odd the way the game's been refereed with these kind of bits. I personally thought it was fine. It was just a big play made by two good players.
Yeah, the consistency, that's always the big one. And even actually Curtly Aronsdale, we'll talk about the box game later on, but he got yellow card for a shot that many people wouldn't have thought was a yellow card. Particularly someone so little as Kurt Lee, the tiny little winger. Look, it was 31-28 in the end, so a 3-point win to the All Blacks. The only difference between the two sides, the boot of Damien McKenzie with a penalty in the 44th minute. They scored 4 tries inside 28 minutes, 3 tries inside 15 minutes before the Wallabies responded through Fraser McWright and then later on Matt Fessler. But if we think about that initial 15 minutes, just defensively, what do you think's going wrong there? Because they didn't have much ball. They made a meal of the opening 20, 30, 40 seconds with going into touch, and then Tom Wright not finding touch after Noel Olesio drops the ball backwards and Nick White quickly passed to Tom Wright. But defensively is where the Wallabies really struggled. What did you see there that allowed for the All Blacks just to kind of cut through those Wallabies like a knife through butter?
Yeah, it was... and to be fair, the commentators mentioned it as well, but I thought they were spot on. We were very passive in our D, which is okay. Like, it's not necessarily, it's a tactic whether you fly line speed or you go soft. But usually when you go softer, you'll go harder at the breakdown and you'll slow the ball up that way. And then, other teams like South Africa will traditionally might fan out and then just blitz, at 100 miles an hour with line speed. And we didn't seem like we had either at the start of the game. Like Fraser and that weren't getting an opportunity to get on the ball. And then every time they got into that like 13 channel, 12, 13 channel, we might have one guy rush up, but the winger or the 13 was just sitting back, and it was quick, easy hands. So we seemed kind of in between two systems, and it was quite frustrating because we know the Kiwis like to move the ball there. The Kiwis are playing off 10 to the forward, and then he's even got time to play at the back, and they're playing again. They're getting 3-4 passes away, which in recent times that has never been the case. You're usually landing on that second or third pass every single time. So, yeah, tactically there were some interesting choices there. Our defensive system was, like I said, if you're going to do that, we have to go harder at the ball, and we just weren't. The ball was coming far too quickly, and so that it just allowed New Zealand to kind of get through. And I think Fraser started getting some, on-ball pressure later on in the game. And you saw that. You compare that to the Kiwis. I think there was one time when Hunter threw a ball to the ground. I think Severus just comes through. And, that's that kind of that connection and line speed that I'm talking about, is where we had that in the middle, but we didn't have the winger following that up. And it just made it too easy for the Kiwis, I thought. So, yeah, in between two minds there, I thought.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, if there's one area where Joe Schmidt's highlighting, it's just nailing that, because their attack I actually thought looked pretty good. It was probably the best attack I've seen, particularly that second half. They actually started to, yes, it helps when you're up against 13 players at one point in time, but there was gaps being found, and the hole that Brandon Panger-Amosa just went through, it was gaping, and there was quite a few of those occasions. Even Lenny Katau, I know the try wasn't scored, but it didn't really affect the play. The Kellaway knock on, which was definitely a knock on, but it was almost in the one action, and all of a sudden Lenny Katau's striding away. I agree. I think I asked Tate McDermott about those defensive struggles earlier today on Monday, and he said, look, it's seeing those pictures and making sure that we're all on the same page seeing them, because I think they were definitely not on the same page. So yeah, in terms of, you can't just have one person shooting out and having a zigzag defense, and that's what it looked like for a lot of the time. From a positive perspective, what did you like about the comeback? Because I thought the All Blacks probably should have had 50 on the Wallabies by 60 minutes. There was probably 3 disallowed tries, but there was probably 6 or 7 tries, if you include those 3 that were disallowed. Like, that's a lot, and it's the last pass that just wasn't hitting the mark for the ABs, which generally they do really, really well. But the Wallabies did stick in the fight, and then they managed to turn it around and finish with that wet sail. So what did you actually like around that 60-minute mark where they started to find ascendancy and get themselves into the game?
It's just that, like, rather than a tactical thing, just mentally to be able to withstand that, like, and don't discount the fact that those disallowed tries don't have a hit on your confidence. Like, you're sitting under the post going, oh damn, and then you go, oh geez, luckily. And so like that takes a bit of a hit. You wear that, but to be able to kind of have that robustness to come back and stick to it and have a crack, and then somehow find a way to be in a chance to win a game like that, those kind of lessons are going to be big for this young team. And I think that's it shouldn't be, like, we shouldn't discount that. Like, they're very valuable lessons. And like I said, it's not necessarily a tactical thing that you look at the X and O's, but you just go like, listen, somehow we were in that game with a couple minutes to go. Like, that's a remarkable effort. How you did that, how you problem solved to that point is amazing. And so that should give you confidence that if you do wear a few early, you come back, you don't give up, you keep fighting. So no, fair play. Like I said, lesser teams would have rolled over, and I think fair play to them for sticking in it.
It'll be fascinating to see what Joe does from a selection point of view, because I don't think it was Nick Frost's best game. He missed quite a few tackles, particularly in that opening 20 minutes. But it's not always as simple as going, you know what, Lucan had a great last 25 minutes. Let's just start him. It's not just Brandon Panger-Amosa, a really nice, exciting, eye-catching cameo too. Like, you don't always get the same result when you start a player, do you? So juggling that selection hat will be interesting. Yeah,
preaching to the converted, mate. I know better than most. I would always play my best rugby in the last 30 for some reason when I come off the bench at the start, and I just didn't find that momentum a lot of the times and struggled a little bit. So yeah, there's some guys that are probably built for that. Look, I think if you look at a guy like Lucan and Nick Frost, you could probably argue that Lucan's probably better suited to the early exchanges anyway because of the physicalness, and then Nick Frost can come on when the game opens up. You know, we've seen him countless times pop up, whether it be defensively or an attack on an offload and open field play. So I think that's good. Yeah, I'd probably want to stick with Fessler. I think Paying almost had a good game, but like that's his job and he needs to do it again. But yeah, look, the bench was it was good impact from our bench. Like I said, to get us back into that game. And a guy like Dylan Peach was nice to see, his physical, abrasive style in the game. And like I said before, particularly when we're lacking a bit of size in the back line. And I think our team seems to do a lot better when we have ball runners on the field. And fair credit to a guy like Alan. It's usually was something that Taniela has well and truly over him, but he was carrying very well when he came on. And yeah, I think we seem to do well when we have a lot of good ball carriers. And so yeah, working around that will be the way forward, I think.
Yeah. Now we can't also, like, when we're talking about Nick Frost, like, we don't just go throw him to the scrap heap because he doesn't have a great game. Like, we've got to remember this guy has actually been shouldering a lot of the burden. Like, he's been playing a lot of minutes, deep minutes. He's just come back from Argentina. Like, I think you've got to allow for players to go, like, he's still pretty young. He's only in his third season of international rugby, I think it is. Like, he's a pretty young player, all things considered, when you think about the test game. Someone who's not so young is Marika Korobetti. Where do you think he's at the moment? Do we give him the same kind of – do we give him more rope because he hasn't, what he's done in the past, which has just been incredible, a couple of John Eales medals, or do you go, you know what, Marika, I don't think we'll see him on the spring tour. I think just like knowing the international season, knowing that he's got a Japan season coming up, it's still a couple of months away, obviously, but I could see Marika not going. So do you give Marika another crack now, or do you go, Dylan, have a crack and Marika come off the bench? What would you like to be seen there?
Oh, I think Marika has enough money in the bank. Like, honestly, his first 1 or 2 games this season, you're like, he hasn't skipped a beat. He is. Yeah. He's looking great. He's had a couple quieter games from his point of view, but like for guys like him and your Bobby Valentinis, we're expecting them to be the best players every game because we quite frankly don't have their class of player all across the board. And so when they're a little bit off, there's this intense scrutiny on them. So yeah, look, I'd be allowing him a little bit of leeway in the sense that I don't think he's by any means past it. It's not a case of, he's on his last legs, we might move him on. I think he's still got a lot to offer. It's just been a, quite couple games, and I'm sure he'll bounce back. Same way, like I said, with Bobby Valentini, he's the other guy who's, a world-class player in our team. And if he has a quiet game or whatever, you give him a bit of slack. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's probably my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think initially I thought, you know what, he's not in great form. Why not give Dylan Peach a crack to start? But at the same time, they're about to go to Wellington, where some stability, some experience, some big match experience, I think is really, really crucial. When the other thing I think about with Dylan is I think he's 26, 27 now, but he's young in his international experience. And so I like the fact that he came off and off the bench and he played with so much confidence. And I don't think you necessarily need to then start the guy. He can play now 30 minutes and play with that same confidence, rather than perhaps it is definitely a different mentality starting a game of rugby, and it's already a sold-out crowd. It was sold out best part of a week ago. So it's going to be a hostile environment, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Razor Robinson's going, guys, we need more out of you because that wasn't good enough on the weekend. So I wouldn't mind seeing the same, certainly from 10 onwards, I wouldn't mind seeing the same players. I wonder whether or not Nick White plays and starts. I think we saw the in him. We saw that prickly kind of nature, the combative kind of nature. I think defensively he was good. From an attack perspective, I think he was actually pretty good too. I just thought it was quite harsh for Jake Gordon to be left out of that side initially. So I just wonder whether or not Nick plays as well.
Yeah, it seems to be a case whether it's Nick or Jake, isn't it? Starting, and Tate's probably got the cemented in that 21 jersey. But yeah, look, I'm not sure which way Joe will go. I wasn't sure if Jake was sick or whatever, or if they chose Nick for a bit of experience. So yeah, unsure where he'll go there. I do agree with you though. I think for Dylan Peach's development, coming off the bench and maybe increased minutes in terms of 30 more minutes would be ideal. Like starting him, and then if it doesn't go to plan, that really that hurts. That'll hurt his development a little bit. So I think him coming off the bench, having the same sort of impact he had on the weekend, would really catapult him, I think, going into the spring tour and further beyond as well. He'd have a lot of confidence out of that. So yeah, we'll see how he goes. Like I said, the coaches have been traditionally a little bit, conservative with their selection. So I hope that's the way they go.
Yeah, well, Langy Gleeson, another one who took a step forward, I think, on the weekend, which is great for his development too. Mm. So all the selection news, of course, on the roar.com.au, probably filtering out hopefully on Wednesday, but obviously the team announcement on Thursday, which is 48 hours, is just the typical procedure with what the Wallabies operate with. Give us a bit of a score line. What do you think is going to happen this second test?
I think I think Wellington's a good thing for us. Wellington isn't the Eden Park, and the Kiwis know that. I think they're going to be under a huge amount of pressure, though, to be fair. So, look, if we start well, I think we can put ourselves in the game. I do think that we'll get a bit of a old school All Black response here that Steve Hansen spoke about last week. I really do. I think they'll be at the top of their game. I think they'll be talking about those missed chances. And, I think they'll probably win by, 12 to 18.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I'm wondering about, from a tactical point of view, the All Blacks seem to run the ball and test the Wallabies with that zigzag defence that they had. Do you think this week that maybe they put the ball on the toe a little bit more just to try to muck around with their defensive strategy and confuse them more like that? Or do you think it's just more of the same?
From the Kiwi side of things? Or
Yeah.
Look, I'd be testing it early. I'd be running and then having a feel what they're doing second and third in. Are the Aussies holding off, or are they going? And if they're going, then I'd start pinning corners until they have to guard the backfield and then running it again. So the Kiwis are good enough to adjust. There's not many teams in the world as good as them, and to kind of change tact as the game goes, because they have such a good feel of it. So I'm interested in what we do. Are we I don't know if we're good enough to be just changing our system, week to week, particularly defensively. That's a lot harder than attack to change. So it would be interesting to see if we are going to stick with this kind of a bit more passive, aggressive, a passive defensive line, but then get hard at the ball. So that's one of the things. If you do pick, ball runners that I spoke about earlier, which it seems that we're doing, you lose a little bit of on-ball presence, which means that it becomes a bit more difficult defensively. So, getting that balance is going to be key. I think if our midfielders can get on the ball a bit better and help a guy like Fraser McWright out, then it means your Bobby Valentinis and your Fraser McWrights, you can have good ball runners like they are, and then your midfielders kind of pick up the slack around the breakdown. So, it will interesting game. It always is tactically. I do like watching the way Joe picks and the way he plays, because you can tell he's a thinker of the game. And you saw with that overthrow a couple of times on the weekend, one of them led to a try. The other one, Marika headbutted. But it's there's definitely some thinking and some thought going into the way they're playing, and it's it's pretty cool to kind of unpack the week after.
Well, a last home test for Sam Cane and TJ Perinara as well. So for someone like TJ at his home ground, he'll be wanting to have a really memorable send-off, and that's presuming he gets picked, but I think he will. Someone, you just mentioned the word thinking and thoughtful, and that is, I think it sums up our next guest really well. It's the Rugby Australia chairman. It's Dan Herbert. Well, it's a very warm welcome to the Roar Rugby Podcast, the Rugby Australia chairman, Dan Herbert. Dan, thanks for coming on the pod.
My pleasure, Christy. G'day, and g'day to Matt as well.
Dan, it's an apt time to have you on the pod because the Wallabies are returning to Wellington, and for you, that was a happy hunting ground once upon a time back in 2000.
Yeah, in 2000, I'm not sure how many other times it was happy. I remember one Super Rugby game where Shane Drum turned it on its head. I think we were down by about 30 points at halftime and turned around to win it. But yeah, I do. I mean, I was saying to someone on the weekend, all of those games now, if I look back, I get mixed up with a lot of the moments that happen in each game, sort of, the runs you make or tackles or missed tackles or whatever happens. It gets hard to pinpoint exactly, but you do remember the big moments that happen. And that was obviously a big one. And during that time, there were just a number of Bledisloes that you just couldn't write the script any better than what happened, really. And it was an amazing time to be involved. And it was we had a number of really good games out at Stadium Australia, or Core Stadium as it's now known, which again we had another belter and just a great atmosphere on the weekend.
How do you go watching the games now? Obviously, still very much connected. Do you watch it nervously? Are you like, is it a job interview for guys like Joe Schmidt? How does it feel?
No, I find it to be honest, I find it very difficult. It's I had a number of years out of the game where I watched it purely as a fan and enjoyed that because, whilst you've really got a vested interest in wanting your old teams to perform well, it's a different, it's quite different now. And I was always nervous as a player. I used to sit in the dressing room and I used to explain this when they first started to bring in sports psychologists. And we'd talk about things and I'd say, sometimes I sit in the dressing room and hope that I'll get injured in the warm-up because I'm so nervous about going out there. And then as soon as you get out there, it was fine. As soon as I crossed the white line, it didn't, I had no nerves. And, the thing now, though, is I get nervous and I don't cross that white line. So I'm still nervous until the very end of the game.
Oh, it's extraordinary to think that given the yards that you'd dominate the gain line and including that famous win in 2000 that I was just referring to with John Eales's late kick. When you're talking about it's difficult to watch now, is that because every game at the moment, it does seem like there's more jeopardy on the line, given the Wallabies perhaps struggles over the last 10 years, but now very much you're so close to having been on the board since I think 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're close to it. I mean, I'm obviously closer to it now than beforehand. And, you know the people a lot more, a little bit about the players and how much work they're putting in. So you want the right result for them, but also the fans who have been very loyal and stuck with you through a pretty tough period. You want the right thing for them. And it's, I explained to someone on the weekend, again, I think it was an ABC interview and they said how much depends on today. And I said, to be honest, I don't think that much hangs on it, but you do just want to see a bit of progress. I don't think there's ever a game really where you're going to say everything hangs in the balance. I think that people just want to see you taking the step forward. And I think what we've seen if you look at the crowds we've had this year, I think people are buying in. I think they like the way, the cut of Joe's jib. I think they like the fact that, Phil's putting his heart and soul into it. I think they can see that the team themselves are really playing with a bit of grit. And I think it's a hallmark of an inexperienced team to be up and down like they've been. So, to have sellout in Brisbane, I think 1,000 shy of sellout of 60,000 in Perth, and then 68 on the weekend, that looked to me like about 75. I think there's really good undercurrent of support there. You want to try and give them as much as you can to hang on to that. There's a bit more riding on it than what used to.
And is that how you see Joe's start of his tenure? It's, a bit up and down, but, a lot of good signs shown as well? Yeah,
I don't know where you sit on this, Matt. I always think too much can be put around one particular person. I think a coach is, the head coach is obviously very important, but every job you do, every place you go, there'll be different dynamics and different factors that feed in. That one of the big differences of Joe coming here to say his time at Leinster was he got to coach, in Ireland, he got to coach Leinster, where he doesn't have that opportunity here. But you just, if I look at, even working our way back through a federated model where we've got to get stakeholders on side. You've got to get them buying into your overall high performance plan, the type of people you need to, I guess, get them in a room and get them agreeing. You need some people who are really, self-deprecating and humble, but also extremely good at their job. And Joe fit the bill there, as did Peter Horn, as does Jamie Fernandez on the women's side. So you need those styles of people to, I guess, to get the buy-in from the Super Rugby clubs, which, it's always been sort of topsy-turvy, up and down. So, that for me, I just knew that he had the right style. And I think if I look at the Wallabies over a period of time leading into this, I think, they've always been able to perform certain things quite well, but there was a sloppiness in their play that certainly hasn't been eradicated. There's still some, there's still certainly a lot of chinks there to iron out. But every place Joe's got, one of the hallmarks of his teams is the attention to detail, and I just think that was something that the Australian team would benefit from is a really close eye on the detail. And I think between him and Laurie Fisher, Mike Cron, Jeff Parling, those are the sorts of things you want to instill in the team to get the basics right. And we're not there, but I think there's some signs, but it will be. I think Joe used the term, it's not linear, and it won't be. It'll be up and down. As long as we're over a period of time, we're going forward, then hopefully we can build that. And then underneath that, there's a number of other aspects that we need to work on as well.
Obviously, something that stands out in the next couple of years, next year with the Lions. And is there too much ground to make up? Does Joe have the time to get to make that a competitive series? And if so, or if not, do you see a shot in the arm, potentially around the selection, international players maybe coming into the picture, or is that not really on the cards?
Oh, look, to answer the first. Well, firstly, has he got time? Look, I don't know. I mean, you'd like longer, but I do think there's a number of test matches there between now and then. They'll have a lot more time to build a bit of team cohesion, shared experience. Between that team now going on tour, there'll be an A program, or Australian 15, we're calling it. So there'll be, I think, 64 players over in Europe at the end of the year getting experience and looking at the squad depth going into that Lions series. I know they'll start to, or they are already planning what the year's going to look like before the Lions. One of the things I was really keen on, which looks to be a little bit tough at this stage. I was keen on an Anzac Bledisloe because I thought that was going to be a great opportunity for the team to play ahead of the Lions series. But, that's proving a little bit difficult at this stage to get in for next year. So, look, has he got time? I don't know. I know I'd love if it was another year away, but it is what we've got. And they've got a pretty committed group there. So I've got no better idea of that than you. In terms of overseas eligibility, there's plenty of freedom there and I see some things written, and other people in the street make comment to me around opening up the eligibility. There's plenty of flexibility there right now if they want to use it. And if you go back to even around the COVID time, where we deliberately put a lot of flexibility in and around the policy with the close down of the borders. And we had people, I think that year we had Quaid, we had Samu, we had Sean McMahon, we had the Arnolds, we had Skelton, we had a bunch of players. And then on the overseas tour, we had other people come in as well, some we haven't seen since. So there's the ability for Joe to pick a number of those. And if he felt that the team would be improved by picking some others, then he need only ask. And, where there is a discernible difference, then, we're not going to stand in his way. But he's of the mind right now there's actually a better benefit to back the kids and the guys who are here to give them more experience and give them more game time and build the squad depth that way. If he wants to supplement by bringing in 1, 2 or more, then he can. But at the moment, he's making a deliberate decision to build that squad depth and experience with the guys that are here.
There's a lot to pick apart there, and it's so good to having you on the pod so we can ask these questions, Dan. But is there an official policy at the moment? Because I think it was at the start of 2022, it was called the Overseas Eligibility Policy, which was, a minimum of 30 tests or 5 years of eligibility. Could you still pick someone like what Eddie did last year, who hasn't actually played for the Wallabies, hasn't played a test, or might not have played 3-4 years of Super Rugby, or is it still the previous guidelines that you're working under?
No, the policy was changed a little while ago, and I think it probably got lost on some people. But there is the ability. I think we dropped the test cap number down. I think it's 1. I think it's just you played a test, and there's the ability for the Wallabies to bring in 3 players. But if they want to bring in more, then just simply to put forward the reasons why, and it'll be considered. So there is a sort of an overarching agreement with New Zealand where we won't go lock, stock and barrel, but it's certainly there's some flexibility there. I do think though that people get a bit romantic about players playing overseas and thinking that they'll immediately be the shot in the arm that we need. If I look back over the history of my time around on the board and what's happened there, the only time I would say there's been a really positive difference around not an individual's performance but the team performance, when Samu and Quade played together in that truncated version where we had double headers down the Gold Coast and up in Townsville. We went on a bit of a run, and Quade and Samu had obviously played a lot together at Queensland, and they were at the top of their game. They were a lot younger, a few years younger than they are now. If I look across, and you guys may share a different view of this, I don't know how many you'd actually add right now that would have an immediate difference on team performance, because I think if you look at the French competition, it's different to test footy, and same with the English Premiership. It's a little bit different. Not to say that guys couldn't make an immediate difference, but it is a bit different, and you'd need to spend a bit of time there. And with that window the way it is, it does make it a little bit harder and probably easier to bring them in for the end of year tours. But yeah, that's there. Peter and Joe are far more qualified to talk on the ability of these guys bringing them in. But we would be as supportive as we possibly can be, because like everyone, we want the strongest Wallabies team. So we would be, we'd be very supportive of what they look to do there.
Yeah, I'd probably say Giddo and Drew Mitchell had a significant impact in 2015. That with regards to the Lions next year, is there does Reg 9 extend earlier for Lions? Like, so will we be able to have that kind of longer run-in as you're kind of suggesting?
Yeah, I don't remember, Matt, to be honest. I know it's been discussed, but there'd have to be, I still think it's in play. So I don't, the Lions are obviously coming together, and there's been an agreement sorted out there between the clubs. But to be honest, I don't know what the dates are, but you'd be looking to have a trial, or not a trial, I shouldn't call it a trial. You'd be looking to have some games leading into the Lions. But I don't know in terms of the Reg 9 whether that would actually change during that year. I can't remember, to be honest.
So without with it seeming unlikely that the All Blacks will play a Bledisloe fixture, is there the possibility of someone else, and perhaps not, given it's a Super Rugby competition involving New Zealand and Australia? And secondly, there was the idea that the Lions were going to take on the Rebels. So who's the Lions likely to take on now? Is it going to be an Australia A or that Pacifica side that we were hearing about too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it hasn't been announced yet, so I can't share some of the conversations that are being had right now, because they're yet to be inked. So, but there is, there still will be that game in Melbourne. It'll, obviously it won't be against the Melbourne Rebels, or it won't be against the contracted players from the Melbourne Rebels at that time. Yes, there'll be other teams that will be playing leading into the Lions, but again, that's yet to be announced. So I can't say anything about it at the moment.
And Dan, 64 players. Yeah, there had been strong talk about several Australia A or Wallaby 15 matches, and that Wallaby 15 concept came. It might have even been in 2016 or so, and Scott Wiseman might have even led that side. What kind of fixtures are the Wallaby 15 going to be coming up against? Is it 2 or 3 different premiership sides, or who are we looking to see?
At this stage, it's Bristol and it's an England 15. So there may be yet, I'm not sure if they've locked in and it's only those 2 matches, but they've definitely agreed, and I think that's been announced that those 2 games have already been locked in. I know and I know some of the other Super Rugby clubs are also looking at playing their own games as well. So there's a bit happening later on.
And will that be pretty much predominantly Australian-based players, or like once again, does Reg 9 pertain to an A game, or is that only test matches?
Yeah. No, the clubs would have to release them. So sometimes, and even outside of the Reg 9, we'd have the likes of Peter Horn, or in prior days Scott Johnson, who'd be dealing directly with the clubs in Japan and over in Europe to see if they'd release players. So that will no doubt happen again. But I do know that there's more a view from Peter and Joe that they want to reward the players that are playing here in Super Rugby, and they just feel that they've got a better long-term prospect where players are under their watch here. But there's certainly the flexibility if they want to bring in some from overseas.
What surprised you about being Rugby Australia chairman? Because it's a role that's been held by many, and so as the CEO, it was a bit of a revolving door for some time. Many people have had so many great ideas, they haven't always stuck. And I know that one of Eddie's criticisms last year was the fact that RA and it doesn't have the ability, because it's the federated model, doesn't have the ability to kind of act unilaterally at times. How have you found the role, and what are some of the challenges and what surprised you both positively and negatively?
I'd say most of it's pretty challenging, Christy, from a stakeholder management to a financial. There's lots of moving pieces. I mean, it's not a surprise. I wouldn't say anything greatly has surprised me, because I'd worked in a state body for many years, and you work pretty closely with the national body. It's just a big beast. There are, if you're running an NRL competition, it's just an NRL competition. They don't have to worry too much about the representative, the states take over their 3 big state of origin. They just run an NRL competition. But you've got men's and women's 15 sevens, you've got the pathways, you've got lots of different components that feed into it, talent ID, talent recruitment. And there's a lot of good ideas that people have that you want to implement, but it takes funding as well. So you've got to be able to fund it. Then you're trying to get the most out of it without the available funds that would be preferential. So nothing's really surprised me. I think the sitting in a state chair, I think, has helped me at least understand that. I would think that one of the things I've said in the past again is sport. People like to look at sport like they do a business, and it's the same as my corporation. That I've been on a board, or I've been a CEO of a corporation. It just is different. Sport's different. And there are some similarities, and there are some things that you can apply directly, but there's a lot of, treating athletes like they're employees just doesn't work, in my view anyway. And they're different. They're wired differently. They're not wired to go a 9-to-5 job. They're wired to want to go and be the world's best at something. And that's not always the same in life outside. So I think there's, I think there are certain nuances, and there are certain things that are similar, but it's, it is a challenging environment because there's so many moving pieces. You haven't got the money to do things. I use the analogy, there's 100 spinning plates, and we've just got to focus on which of those spinning plates will actually get us a return from a fan perspective, from a player perspective, from a financial perspective, because we can't do everything. I think again, sitting in a state chair allowed me to see a number of iterations of Rugby Australia, or at the time ARU, where they'd have a great plan and they'd have a strategy to do X, Y, Z, but unless you can get people behind you, then it doesn't matter. And so what we wanted to do was take a lot of time to, one, build the plan with all of the state bodies and the member unions, make sure that they supported it. So we've had 2 of those stakeholder summits. We've got another one coming up. And then hopefully they'll buy into where we're headed, as opposed to it being something that's handed directly down into the state bodies from ARU or Rugby Australia. They played a part in building it, so hopefully they own it, and we can have a shared vision of what the next 10, 15 years looks like. But the problem with stopping and starting all the time, and you never get enough momentum. It's the old analogy of the snowball. If you keep stopping the snowball and starting again, then you never actually get a lot of momentum down the hill. And so we've, I think, at rugby over a long period of time with that chopping and changing that you talk about, doesn't mean anyone's wrong in what they've done. They've had good ideas, but they've never been able to sustain that, because what often happens is people listen to the noise and people react to the noise. And so, the Wallabies get pumped by 50 points or something happens, and then all of a sudden there's a outcry for change and people come out of the woodwork with all their own ideas. And then all of a sudden, that plan that might be, 2 steps in, all of a sudden has to start again with a whole bunch of new people, and you lose so much momentum. So, my appeal is just for people to stay the distance, because we've got a team, and we've got a good enough team here that if they're given time in the seat, they'll get there. And I use that analogy across, Phil and his team as well. We'll slowly build that as well, and we'll start to get some rubber on the road there. But it's just going to take time, because the stopping and starting over, I would say now 15 years, different CEOs, different chairs, different coaches, it hasn't served us well. So we've actually got to just stick to it for a period of time.
Herbie, for another spinning plate in a way, as you said, a third tier, like a national provincial type competition, is that anywhere on the horizon? Is it a priority, or is it something that we probably look to revisit once we have that kind of cash injection of the Lions and the World Cup?
The old model of the the APC, Australian Provincial, I think it was the APC, or something like that, then the NRC, that's not a priority. So we won't be anytime soon instigating something like that. What is a priority, and we're fleshing out now with one of the new board members who's joined, has come out of that clubland. So I'd love to see a national club competition, or a variable of a national club competition. I just think there's good tribalism in the club, so I'd like that to be the element. And so Hans has already started meeting with a number of the clubs to gauge their appetite for it. And so again, we can create it, but it's whether they come to it. And so we've got to make sure that they're interested in doing it. I don't think it's a go to woe in one swoop. I think, if you look at what's happened in Europe, and you've been part of it over there, Matt, with the Heineken and the local English championship, you got the French running around, and there's two, there's the Cup and the Shield and various. I think, if we can look at what's worked in some other markets, adapt it to here, then there is a possibility that we could do it. But, there's no point in bringing something in if the clubs don't want it and don't value it. So, again, they're amateurs, or mostly, it might be a little bit of money, but a lot of the clubs in Brisbane and Sydney are now run, they've actually got professional staff that are running them. So I think there is the capacity for a lot of clubs to do this, and I think they could make more money. I think it would be a product that a broadcaster could have an interest in. I think sponsors would have an interest in. I think players would have an interest in. But we've actually just got to go through and make sure that we can understand. Some of the clubs, for example, don't get access to their grounds at certain times of the year because cricket, they swap with cricket. So we've got to work out a few of those pieces. And then, with a view that if there is an appetite there, that might be something that we look to bring in 25 maybe. And it might be step 1, and step 2, it might look slightly different in 26, but we slowly build that over the next 2 or 3 years.
Dan, I know we've got to let you go in a moment, but just before we do, the broadcast deal, I imagine that conversations are already underway around what that might look like, and firming up what the content is important with regards to that. But how important is it to get an uplift in the current broadcast deal for the sustainability of the game going forward?
Yeah, well, Christy, it's important if we want to maintain and improve on what we're doing. So you've always got to cut your cloth to suit. So, it's important. And I think it helps, for example, if you look at, I think we had good viewership on the weekend particularly for a day game. We had a great attendance there. It was a great atmosphere, and we've had that pretty well all year. So there is an undercurrent of support. And we think that whilst there are some challenges in the broadcaster market, we know we've got a good product there. And so what, if you look at the super clubs, Super Rugby Super Rugby Inc., it loses money. For me, that's a challenge. So you want to fix the Wallabies, you've got to make sure that the Super Rugby clubs are performing better. I think we've got We had 10 wins out of, I think it was 26 last year, which was up from 5 the year before. We've got now some really good coaching setups in the clubs, and I think we've got some really strong player lists. So I think next year we're actually in a really good position for the super clubs to start performing a hell of a lot better, and that will bode well for the Wallabies. So that there's been a lot of focus from Peter and Joe in particular around making sure that those Super Rugby clubs have got the right coaching talent to then come through into their environment. So I think that bodes well. So I think Super Rugby has there's an opportunity there to continue to invest and grow that product. It makes it hard unless there is an uplift, and there are different strategies that you can pull if you have to, but you don't necessarily want to. I think for us to be able to compete for talent and to make sure we're maximising the opportunity here with our players, then we would need more, because right now it's a struggle to feed all of the mouths and to continue the men's and the women's programs. The women's program was another, that wasn't something 10, 15 years ago that was in the reckoning. So that's a new cost base, and it's going to take time before that turns into a cost neutral exercise. So there's a lot of reasons why an uplift is important.
Just lastly, speaking of ensuring that Super Rugby franchises are successful and sustainable, would there ever be the idea of having the 4 Super Rugby sides battle it out well before the season, so that not only is there more games, more content, but there can be that extra layer of talent that play with each other so much, and that builds towards the cohesion that people like Ben Doran and have often spoken about. Could that be played later in the year? It doesn't seem like it.
It can.
We have 5-month pre-seasons at times, and that's not always the case up north, is it?
No, you've got to. Well, there's the collective bargaining agreement, which it's not. There are certain leave stipulations, but you got to look at the season as a whole and work out: is it more Super Rugby games that you want to have, or do you want to have a national club competition? Do you want more tests? So you got to look at the calendar as a whole. But yeah, there is the opportunity. We used to have it many years ago with used to call it the Rico National Championship. I wouldn't say it wasn't the same as playing in Super Rugby, because often the test match players were out, but it did give the other guys some more game time. But again, with some of the other things that are in potentially in the calendar, with the Nations Championship, potential to move also the test window to mirror the Six Nations test window, I think is potentially an important thing as well. That's always been a struggle for Sanzar, but there is just at the moment a bit of an appetite that if we mirror that, then that starts to open up the end of the year where you can have more rounds of Super Rugby. So rather than just the teams playing each other here, you might actually be able to have another round of Super Rugby. But there's also, there's plenty of other prospects of do other teams come into Super Rugby? Just got to look at all of that. Rather than, there's nothing to stop Queensland and playing New South Wales, playing the Brumbies another time. That can happen, but it does come if we do it in the current format, then it usually comes at the cost of them playing for their clubs. So it's just a balancing act. But yeah, it's not off the table, and it's been done before.
Hey Dan, so good to have you on the podcast today, and so much to chew over. And I'm sure we'll be chewing over those subjects for a long, long time to come. But really enjoyable chat, and thanks for making your time too.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Herbie. Appreciate it. It's a difficult puzzle to put together, but you're doing a good job, and appreciate the honesty and transparency. It's not every day we get the chair on the potty, so appreciate it, mate.
Thanks, boys.
That was really good. I loved that, because I think Dan and he just spoke really clearly, concisely. You're filled with a bit more confidence that there's some planning going on in the background.
Yeah, I really like it how open and transparent he was, because it makes you understand, okay, like this is what's happening. Like, how many times have we spoken about eligibility on here, and, what's the rule? We don't know the rule, or, I've always assumed that Joe has been wanting these overseas players, but, it's nice to actually get it from the horse's mouth in a way and hear what he's saying and kind of the bits and pieces that are going on behind. So yes, like, gosh, really appreciate him coming on.
I think he said 64 players for an end of year tour. So that's a lot of players. But it's great that they're all going to be in the same kind of area. So Joe's going to be able to have his fingerprints all over it. Who actually coaches that side remains to be seen. Fascinating that they're trying to work out these other tests as well at the same time. So there's a lot going on there. The idea of a national club comp, I think it could work. I hope there's buy-in from the clubs. I hope there's not people going, well, you're going to go to a club that's going to feature prominently rather than one that won't. But, I like that idea. I do just think that there has to be some more super games. So whether or not that's a longer season or rather than made up NRC sides, a Super Rugby AU comp at, in November or December, because I just think that will allow for all those players that rarely get minutes in super seasons to actually build and find confidence, and it will help the coaches test their depth as well.
Yeah, it's not something I thought of actually before you mentioned it, but it makes a lot of sense. I know when I was involved in playing, there was always a lot of talk about it maybe before the super season, but the way the global seasons kind of the schedule, it makes it quite difficult. I like the idea of the national club competition. It is very much a case of money. Unfortunately, in all of these so-called solutions that we've thrown up, there's no clear-cut one because there's so many competing interests in, like, cricket fields, rugby fields turning cricket fields, like something that people wouldn't usually think of. I remember about 8 years ago, I was bored one time up in Europe, and we were playing up there, and because I'd seen it, and then I put together this little like a European Cup format of club competition, and essentially that you kind of have the club competition running during Super, and then once Super's done, you have the European where you kind of go like top 3 from Brisbane, top 3 Sydney, Melbourne, all that, and then kind of planning a home and away fixture, and then potentially a challenge or a second division under that. And it would be cool if they could do something along those lines, and I think leveraging the club game is probably the way to go rather than creating these teams, because we've seen that doesn't really, whilst it might be okay for high performance, it's not great for supporters or financially. It just drains a lot of money. So I hope they come up with something, and it will take someone with a much smarter brain than me.
So, of course, it wasn't just the Wallabies that played on the weekend. South Africa beaten in Argentina by the Pumas. It probably puts the Wallabies' heavy loss, the record loss, into a little bit of context. But at the same time, what a game. Yeah,
I switched it off after like 20 minutes initially because I was like, oh, God, here we go. This is going to be an absolute pasting. And then I obviously came back in a little bit later and couldn't believe it. It was a wicked game, particularly that first half. Like, you talk about momentum, and you're right. In a way, it kind of shows you that even the world's best team can get dusted up by a strong Argentinian team with playing with momentum, playing with that emotion, with that crowd. And it was awesome, and it sets up it's like a final this weekend essentially, isn't it? We haven't had that in a little while.
It certainly is. There's a few nations in the running there. It was 7 tries in that first half, if my maths is right. 0 tries in the second half, and just the 3 penalty goals. So it's just amazing. You don't often see that. And to be fair, that's how like the All Blacks were. They scored all of their points in the first half, and then barely anything in that second. Like, you've got to feel a bit for Lebock there. He's copped a beating, hasn't he, from missing that late penalty. He should have got it, but they had their chances too.
Yeah, it's you really do feel for him, because he's had a lot of question marks over his kicking in recent times anyway, and this only adds fuel to the fire for the people who doubt him. But frustrating, but makes it exciting. And I guess honestly it kind of illustrates what people talk about when you go to South America. There's just this weird feel, like there's this emotion, there's this momentum.
There was lasers again.
Like it is so hard that you can kind of blink and go, oh, like, we're 5 tries down, or in 2018 you blink again and then you're 5 tries up. Like, it just swings and goes, and it's a test of like your resilience and all your processes, because it's difficult. So what a game though. What a game.
I'll tell you what, a Rugby World Cup in Argentina and the Americas, the South America would be just amazing. I don't know if it'll happen anytime soon, but you hope. Augustine Pichot, he'll be pushing for that undoubtedly. So, look, it kind of brings another question to a head as well in my mind, is that what's the Rugby Championship doing? Because the decisions over the last couple of weeks and the last month or two to have the tours between South Africa and New Zealand has meant that the TRC is going to be played every second year. Look, I don't know if that's great for the tournament. I don't know if it's great for Australia and Argentina. Perhaps that it will allow them to tour and perhaps go into other regions too. But you'd never dream of the Six Nations being played every second year. And I know that that's also because of the history of the Six Nations that are being played at the moment. The geography makes it so much easier. But I just think that it doesn't say much about the tournament if you're going to, strip it back and only play every second year. And now we see Argentina playing well and for the first time ever beating Australia, South Africa, New Zealand in the one campaign.
Yeah, I think the Six Nations, the geography is just the kind of trump card in a way. The fact that their longest flight is 3 hours, and that's not even our shortest flight here. Like it makes it very, very difficult. It is a hard one. Like there are times where I feel like the Rugby Championship does feel dated and might need an injection of something, and does limiting the amount of times it played makes it a little bit more like a prestige product or whatever. I don't know. You look back to the history of it, of the Tri Nations, and that was such a wonderful competition and amazing and special.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, and to see that stripped back now, it does feel awkward. I don't know. It feels quite reactive, and I'm sure there's a lot of politics going on because the very fact that we're not that competitive at the moment, you could argue that the other three are probably the most competitive they've been. So I'd like to know what's going on behind closed doors there because, it is a little bit sad.
Well, it's awkward. There's all sorts of things as well with the SANZA nations, the Six Nations. That's a block of 10, essentially. And so what does that mean for the other two nations who are going to be the guest invites to this Nations Championship, being Fiji and Japan? So at the moment, for the Nations Championship, I think only recent reports suggesting as well that the money is going to be about 60-40, 60 to the Six Nations, 40 to the SANZA nations. What happens to Fiji and Japan? What do they get for the money there? So all sorts of things to work out. But I agree. I think it is a little bit stale, the TRC, in some respects. But I wonder whether or not including Fiji, Japan makes it better. That obviously perhaps takes away from the Nations Cup, but at the same time, could you have a promotion relegation as well included there to perhaps allow for that tournament? Maybe it can still be played, but just played out at a separate time, the Nations Cup. So, yeah, a lot to think about there.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to see Fiji and Japan in like we're playing regularly. And ultimately Samoa and Tonga eventually. But I guess that's one of the positives is that it does bring the opportunity that we're all of a sudden trying to find 4 more Test matches now every couple of years. So Japan, Fiji, and the islands potentially. There are ways of developing the game and growing the game in that sense. So yeah, it's not our traditional kind of opponents, but I think I watched Japan and Fiji on the weekend. They played in the final there, and you're silly if you don't think they're up to it. Like they're very much up to it, and they've showed it to be a lot better than us in recent times too. So I think there's opportunity there to grow the game.
Well, maybe we just actually get rid of the TRC and then Australia gets involved in the Nations Cup, and that would be very different, but you would have all those sides around the Pacific interested too. So, yeah, all right, let's park that conversation, turn just a little bit to what else is happening around the world, and that includes the English Premiership and your side, former side, up and about, including your former head coach, a guy that was just on the podcast a few weeks ago, Michael Checker. If you can believe, they go down to Sandy Park and a win first up over Exeter.
That's very hard to do, and he obviously took all the advice we gave him because he started well.
I don't think
but
we
yeah,
spoke at all about Leicester.
yeah,
really.
no, we did off air. I don't think they recorded it. No, that's a huge win. Sandy Park, very difficult place to play, particularly this time of year when it's a little bit warmer. They often like to move the ball a lot down there, and so to win there is good. I'm still a member on all the Facebook groups of Leicester Tiger Ultras, the fans and stuff. So they're all stoked. That's a big win. So yeah, huge win for them, and hopefully springboard for the rest of the season.
Well, we know that the French top 14 is very much up and about, as is the URC as well. So rugby happening and so much of it. Great pod today. Awesome to have Dan Herbert on, and we appreciate his time. Great to see your face. And oh, look, another Bledisloe fixture just a few days away. So we're excited for that, to find out who's the rugby championship winner, but we'll find out whether or not the Wallabies can break that drought across the ditch. So until next week, enjoy your rugby, and thanks for listening to the Roar Rugby Podcast.